In the left corner, we have Euan Murray from the Carbon Trust UK, who says there is clear evidence that product carbon footprinting labels help reduce greenhouse gas emissions across product life cycles. That's Euan. In the right corner, we have Gabriela Fleischer. She says research shows that product carbon footprint labels potentially confuse and mislead consumers. Let's get ready to rumble.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Jakob, and thank you very much for the two participants in this year's debate. I will give a quick introduction how we run the session, how we run the debate. We'll have a 1-hour debate. Each of the contestants, is that the right word? Participants in the debate will have the opportunity to make a point for the pro or con side for 10 minutes each and make very clear what arguments speak for carbon labeling and what arguments speak against carbon labeling. Afterwards, we will give each of them in turn the opportunity to take one argument of the other and respond to that and give that back again afterwards. And this we will continue with each of the arguments, or the most important arguments. And I will also give then the opportunity to you, when we have covered some of the major arguments, to see if you have anything else to respond to individual arguments. So actually, we have two people on stage here who will really engage in a hot debate with each other, but we will also engage in a debate with each other, all of us. So all of you are invited to take part and actually also take a stance, at least on certain arguments that you hear and that you feel have an argument against, perhaps. And in the end, each of the two participants in the debate, Euan Murray and Gabriela Fleischer, will have the opportunity for 3 to 5 minutes to make a closing statement, enhance once more the points made and come to a conclusion. And this we then can all take home as an input to our further reflection on that issue. As Jakob said, we will not have a formal vote for or against carbon labeling. As we know, maybe there's more than pro and con in the end. So please welcome with me or invite with me Euan Murray for the first 10 minutes, the first round of arguments, and by that we start the debate. Please, Euan Murray.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Jakob and Rasmus for a fantastic introduction. I'm not sure whether I feel like a guinea pig or the rabbit in the middle of the road with the car headlights now, but great to be doing this for the first time. This is also a first for me in speaking here without slides. I'm going to just talk to you this morning, and we can have a discussion from there. The topic we're discussing, does carbon labeling work? That's the question we've been asked, and I think it's a really important question. I think that before we can answer that question, there are two things that come before that we need to think about. The first is to really understand what is carbon labeling in the first place. And once we know what carbon labeling is, then we should ask, what do we want carbon labeling to try and achieve? And that will lead us through the discussion. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about each of those. So what is carbon labeling? Well, there's no dictionary definition, but I think a good definition of carbon labeling is any sort of climate change related claim, typically made by companies in relation to their products. And we see lots of different types. This could be about the measurement of a footprint itself. It could be about reduction efforts, or indeed reductions that have been made to a footprint. Of course, there's comparisons between different products. And then there's advice to the people who buy those products on how to use them in a lower carbon way. So a wash at 30 degrees message on your laundry detergent is a carbon label. You could even argue that a please recycle statement is a carbon label too, although that might be stretching things a little bit far. And certainly many of the people here in the room are part of projects that support one sort of carbon label or another. And the means to communicate that information can be just as varied, covering anything from product marketing through advertising, websites, and any other kind of promotional material. And then for consumer-facing labels, there's obviously the product packaging itself. I make the point specifically about consumer labels because we see lots of different types. Many types of labels are actually for business-to-business products, and many types of labels are used not just to influence consumers, but to influence other stakeholders, staff, governments, NGOs, and the like. And I think all of this together is carbon labeling. It's a broad set of climate change-related communications from businesses about their products, delivered through a very wide set of channels. So now that we know what it is, what do we want it to achieve? And I think here there's very good consensus. This is about driving carbon reductions. This is about stopping the climate change problem. And in the last few years, we've seen companies taking the lead in this area. We've seen many of them cutting their footprints. And by that, it's really often Scope 1 and Scope 2. But what the product carbon footprinting approach shows us is that the big emission sources are often elsewhere, somewhere else in the supply chain. And therefore, if we can get better information out there about that, then that must be a good thing. But for me, for carbon labeling to really work, it must lead to a set of new carbon reduction initiatives being delivered, and those will be right across the life cycle of products. Now, I've only got time in this introduction to give you a couple of very short examples, and so I want to almost go back and talk again about three of our most famous projects at the Carbon Trust, the ones actually many of you already know: Walker's Crisps, Tesco washing detergent, and potatoes. So our old favourite, Walker's Crisps. When PepsiCo, which owns Walker's in the UK, when they agreed to be the first brand to use the carbon reduction label, their chief executive, a guy called Salman Amin, stood up and reinforced the label. He very publicly made that commitment that sits within the label to reduce the footprint of that product. And that was widely covered. It made the newspapers, which was fantastic. For him, the footprint itself, the number, was actually irrelevant. What was important was that he now saw an opportunity to change something. And Salman Amin at PepsiCo is a powerful man, but there are three things that, until the label arrived, he couldn't do very much about. The first thing was to make his staff really care about this. He couldn't really get his suppliers involved, and he didn't have a mechanism to help his customers. Now, the business people in the room will know that engaging your employees is critical to making any change actually happen. And I want to ask you to think about that and to picture the guy who maybe works in the Walker's factory. His job is to take the cardboard boxes and put them in the recycling bin. Now, that's probably not the most exciting job you could do. He's probably also paid close to the minimum wage, and motivation's quite difficult to come by. But when his chief executive, through the carbon reduction label, makes that commitment to reduce, all of a sudden this guy's job is super important. He can see that he's helping the chief executive directly, that by recycling that cardboard, he makes a small but important contribution to reducing the carbon footprint of the business and, of course, the products too. And what I was amazed by was the response that the Walker staff gave. They survey them on a regular basis, and staff engagement on the environment shot up in a way that Walkers had never seen before when they first started using the carbon reduction label. And that's been critical to the success of the reductions they've made. And it was achieved because of the label specifically. And of course, the same is true with suppliers. pretty well any business conversation with suppliers is about price, and that's a barrier that's very difficult to break down. But since the launch of the label, Walkers have been able to break down that barrier, engage suppliers on sustainability for the first time. And through a new set of quarterly workshops that they created, they're now working directly with potato suppliers, and they're running trials now to help them cut the footprint of potatoes by half over the next 5 years, with low-carbon fertilizers, new breeds of potato, which need less water too, and a raft of other new technologies. Now, these things have been around for a long time, and of course the relationships have been there for a long time, but it's only through that shared commitment to reduction that the label embodies that these initiatives were able to take shape. I want to pick on the third point about consumers by actually using the other examples. So let's start with washing detergents. I'm sure many of you have seen much of the marketing there, the carbon label marketing around temperatures, around wash at 30. Can maybe we have a show of hands? Who's seen that wash at 30 advertising? Okay, maybe half of the people. Who thinks it works? Who thinks it was a good idea? Again, yeah, probably the same number. The fact is that when Ariel in the UK ran that Wash at 30 campaign, at the time, 2% of the population in the UK were washing at 30. After the campaign, that shot up to 23. So that shows just how powerful that sort of consumer engagement can be. And in our work with Tesco on washing detergents, we found some very similar things. That washing at 30 are called as a good thing. It's one of the best things you can do to reduce the footprint of washing detergent. I say one of the best, it's not the best. It turns out the best thing we discovered was actually getting people to switch, and that by moving from traditional washing powder to super concentrated liquid actually is a bigger reduction than turning down to 30. Now that's also a pretty simple message. It's a simple piece of advice that we can give consumers. It's something that we can reasonably expect most people to understand and then act on. And that's exactly what the Tesco carbon label does. It tells consumers Tesco are making reductions in the supply chain, consumers can wash at 30 and cut their footprint, and consumers can switch from buying one product to another to cut their footprint further. The third example I want to give is around potatoes. And this one makes me laugh. It's quite so simple, actually. Now, with potatoes, roughly half of the carbon footprint comes on farm. And there's some things that the farmers can do that make reductions, some of which I've talked about already. Packaging and transport are basically zero in the carbon footprint. But the other half of the footprint comes in our house. It's about how we use that product. And we discovered the single biggest thing anyone can do to reduce the footprint of a potato is to make sure when we cook them, we put a lid on the pan. Now, that's not rocket science. In helping people understand that, Tesco are not expecting people to become climate scientists. They're not expecting people to pay more for a product. They're not expecting people to do something really complicated or difficult that takes lots of time. It's about a really simple step that they can communicate on their carbon label that really drives behavior change and that cuts the footprint in the home by 80%. So this is material for that product. Now, we're not going to save the world with potatoes, but it's the first small step in something incredibly important, I believe. So to summarize, the life cycle assessment and carbon footprinting journey has taught us all that maybe food miles and plastic bags are not really very important. But we do know that 2/3 of your individual carbon footprint comes from the products and the services that you use. And so if we're to be serious about decarbonizing our economy and about helping people lead sustainable lives, then we have to tackle that 2/3. And carbon labeling gives us a set of communications tools to go out and encourage businesses to do more and to help people make simple cheap, fast, cost-effective changes to what they put in their shopping bag and how they use those products. We know it's not perfect. We know that there's debate about how you measure, what you communicate, when, and how. But irrespective of all that, those are problems that we can solve. And for me, the direction of travel is clear. That's why I think carbon labelling will work.
Thank you very much, Euan Murray. Euan Murray, who's leading, I should add, the product carbon footprinting and carbon labeling work at the British Carbon Trust, and has had quite some experience over the past with their own carbon label. Now I would like to ask Dr. Gabriela Fleischer from the European Association of Consumer Representation and Standardization to respond to what Euan Murray just said and give her own perspective on the question of does carbon labeling work?
Yes, I come back to the CRISP, but later. Thank you for the invitation and giving ANEC the opportunity to presenting some results of studies ANEC has commissioned about LCA and carbon footprint in the last 2 years. And these results are reflected in the position that we are against a label which is only a single number. I do want to start my presentation with giving an overview which products are on the market. They are in the back, but I took some photos and just to let you know, to show you where we talk about. It's pizza and it's foam base and you have numbers on it. This one, it's from, I don't know, South Korea, I think, and this one is from France. And we talk about soya milk. This one is a German one. This is not, I'm not sure if it's still on the market. It's only the sign with an arrow down. Then we have paper towels and milk. We have strong doubts that this information is really good for consumers, good in the mean that it will guide consumers to make the right decision. I do want to come back to CRISP. And I do want to ask a question. Here you can see the South Korean crisps have 590 gram CO2 per 110 gram packed crisp. On the other hand, we have the Walker's crisp with 110 gram. It's a ready salted crisp per 50 gram crisp, and the 120 gram CO2 per 50 gram crisps, it's salt and vinegar. And our question is, what does this tell us? When you are standing in the supermarket in front of all these crisps, what do you have to do as a consumer, not knowing anything about CO2 emissions, about is 100 good or bad? And our conclusion is it says nothing to the consumers, because they do not know, is this one good, this one bad, and the other two ones, are they good? So I have to buy the Walker crisp, salt and vinegar, and ready salted, but I do not have to buy the other one? Or does it mean all the crisps are good, representing here? Or does it mean, with a number on the label, that all crisps are bad? So we do really have strong doubts that the number is guiding a consumer to make an informed choice according to the needs and wishes the consumer has. Another point is that the carbon label sometimes is in addition to other labels, and this is misleading consumers and confusing consumers. You have this light bulbs, and there is the energy label on it, the European energy label, giving the consumer the advice that it's not very good because it's class E, And the consumer in Europe, they are used to this kind of labeling. They know E is a class they do not have to buy because it's a waste of energy. They are going to buy A, sometimes B, but never E, because they know it's not good. It's not energy saving. And on the bottom of this box, you can see the carbon trust label. And it is written that it is, yes, you can read by yourself, and it's a number on it. And I think, we believe, it's really confusing and misleading consumers. They do not know what to do. Do they have to follow this label? They know, do not buy. And what is this added value of this information? We say there is no added value. In contradiction, it is misleading. In our point of view, consumers need either other kinds of labels. It's a type 1 label, like the Blue Angel or the European Flower, or the rated labels, like the energy label, where you can see green ones I can buy, I'm on the right side, but when you go down, it's less efficient. And you can see that E is really, it's less than 50%. It's not the average, it's more bad. So the last point I want to make is consumer information have to be credible. And the reduction claims were already mentioned, and I have done a comparison. I bought Walker's chips in 2008, and I bought a pack with 75 gram CO2 per 34.5 gram pack of crisp. I bought it in 2008. And I bought last week a pack of crisps, 50 pack of crisp with 120 gram CO2. And I did this exercise yesterday. And at the end, when you compare these two amounts of CO2 per crisp, there is no reduction. And the reduction is claimed on the back of the package, of the early package. It is no reduction, it is a plus of 10%, nearly 10%. And then again, it is claimed the first time that consumers or the producers is going to reduce the carbon footprint of the crisp. And this time it is again on the packaging, but there is no reduction. And we have really strong doubts that this information is credible. Why is there any reduction claim again on the package and there is no reduction? It's a plus, it's a contradiction. And this is really for consumer, it's the worst thing which could happen because it's misleading, it's uncredible, and consumers can't trust the carbon trust in this case. I'm not at the end of my presentation, but we had heard about the limitations of the methodology yesterday, and so I can jump to the end of the presentation because all the next slides are about this. And I do want to give you only a short view on the two studies we have made with ANEC, and you can download this for free to get all the information and all the findings. And that's the reason why ANEC is contra a label, the existing label which are on the market already. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela Fleischer. Now we have had some very clear arguments on both sides, for and against carbon labeling. And I would like to ask Euan Murray, we've heard several arguments against his first proposition, and one was information on carbon labels is not able to guide consumers to make good decisions. What do you respond to that? No, you can take that microphone.
Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Great. I think probably the first place we should start is with numbers, because often the broad debate about carbon labeling is oversimplified, and we focus too much just on numbers. So I'd like to start there, but then we should move beyond that hopefully quite quickly. I think with the point about the Walker's comparison, Gabriela was comparing actually two different products, the small bag first time and a big bag second time. So that's why it looks like the footprint is higher, because it's actually a bigger product, it's a different product. In actual fact, over the first 2 years that we worked with Walker's, they reduced the carbon footprint of their crisps by around 7%. They set themselves a target of 3%, and I'm pleased to say they made a 7% reduction, which is on top of the history of energy efficiency improvements they've made in their factory. And that was through a raft of different initiatives. Some energy efficiency, a reconfiguration of the inbound transport, working with suppliers, reconfiguration of their transport into the supermarkets, some work with potato farmers, some work on packaging. But all of that added up to a decent reduction worth about 5,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. And they saved £400,000 into the bargain, which of course is always welcome. It's good motivation for a business to continue to do the right thing. So that's the point about Walker's reduction looked at. I think there's a broader point about numbers and about what we can expect people out there to do with numbers. When we certainly included the number on the carbon reduction label, it was for quite a specific purpose. I think Gabriela's right that today, at least, it's unrealistic to expect people to stand in the supermarket and, when they're busy running around, maybe with screaming kids, to make that number-by-number comparison. I think that's still unrealistic. Certainly the evidence with nutritional labelling would not support the fact that more than a small minority of people actually make those comparisons in store. But the number, I think, does a couple of things. Firstly, the research tells us that people get confidence from the fact that they can see something's been measured. And secondly, it's a clear mark for the companies that information is out there in the public domain, and that they can be criticised if they don't make reductions. People can see how those numbers change over time. But actually for me, and I'm sure for many others in the room, the numbers debate is more of a side issue. And the most important thing is about reductions. And certainly the carbon reduction label is designed as a mechanism to allow companies to make reductions to the footprint of those products over time, and for us as shoppers to see which products are having their carbon footprints reduced. So the simple message there for you in the room, but also for everyone out there buying those products, is the label means the footprint's reducing. It doesn't mean they're perfect. Every product has a carbon footprint. But it does mean the company behind it is making efforts to reduce. And for me today, that's the most important thing. Maybe in 10, 20 years, we can have the more serious debate about numbers and do people really make comparisons. But the reduction efforts by companies today and the signal that sends us as shoppers is the most important thing.
Gabriela Fleischer, Euan Murray says carbon labels may not be understood by consumers and the numbers that we see on there, but they build trust, provide a clear benchmark, and help to communicate reduction efforts. What do you say? Respond to that.
First, I have to come back to the reduction claim and my chart, because we call it in German, it's a Dreisatz I have done. It's a math exercise. And when you, I haven't compared two different sizes. When you do the Dreisatz and put the 120 back to the crisps bought in 2010, it's only when you bought this kind of crisps in 2008, the 50-gram crisps, it's 108 gram. It's not, there is no reduction. I haven't compared only the wrong sizes. When you relate this to the same size, there is no reduction. There is a plus 10%. But when you have it on this, when you see it on the chart again, there is no reduction. And that's why we are really worried about, you say something and it's not true. We can't trust this carbon trust label. There is no reduction. It's really an easy exercise. We have both packaging, so we can compare. And I do not understand how you can point out again that there is a 7% reduction when it's not labeled on the packaging.
Okay.
So I have to come back to your question.
Well, there was the direct response. It was okay, yeah. So, do you want to respond once more to that, Euan, or like to say, you say it was building trust and showed efforts to reduce. Gabriela Fleischer says it actually does the opposite in certain cases that they have seen.
Yeah, okay. I guess I don't agree with that. I'm not sure that we will reconcile that. I think it might be worth talking about a related point that Gabriela made about how you can take numbers and translate that into something simpler for the consumer. And she talked about the A to G rating scheme on things like light bulbs. And I'm not sure that if this is true, but it may be true that actually this is the way that we should go with carbon labeling, and simplifying down to those sorts of messages might actually be the best way to communicate that sort of information. I think the challenge that we've got today is that we don't know how to do that. With something like light bulbs, it's actually very easy to measure the footprint in the use phase and create the scale and define what good performance and define what bad performance is. It's actually quite easy to decide what should be A and what should be G. But when it comes to other products that aren't energy using, and when it comes to assessments not just of the use phase but of the whole life cycle of products, then all of a sudden that sort of simplification becomes very hard. Certainly it's something we have not managed to do. And I think a good example is actually if we think about meat. So if we take something like beef, beef is in the press a lot because it has a relatively high carbon intensity, but we can measure the carbon footprint of a steak, and we could make some changes to the supply chain or to how that's produced and measure the carbon footprint of that different steak. And we could decide that one of them is good and therefore should be A, and one of them is bad and therefore should be G, or one should be red and one should be green if we have a traffic light scheme. Now, that would mean that we have beef with red and green out there in the supermarket. Then let's think about chicken. We could do exactly the same, and we could have red chicken and green chicken, and that would tell people which way to go. But of course, the carbon footprint of the green beef, the so-called lower carbon good beef, is much higher than the carbon footprint of the very bad red chicken. And actually, if we want people to reduce their carbon footprint, maybe getting them to eat a bit less beef and a bit more chicken is actually the best thing to do. But our new A to G scheme or our new traffic light scheme doesn't do that. That's not to say we can't solve this problem. I think we should collectively work on that problem. But I think today there are clear problems that we haven't been able to solve yet around how to use that sort of traffic lighting or A to G system. And actually, I'd welcome any ideas that anyone has, because it's something certainly we've not been able to solve.
Okay. Euan Murray says tips to consumers, information to consumers that encourage climate-friendly consumer behavior depend on information such as carbon labeling to support.
I think not in general. A label makes only sense if you can compare products and if it's guiding the consumer. Otherwise, it makes no sense. When you stand in front of all this crisp with all the numbers on it, and you cannot compare, and you cannot guide the consumer, why is a label on it? It's no guidance for the consumer. And I think it's even worse, because consumer can't trust it, or it's no guidance. So they are not interested in the issue any longer because it's no helpful information. That's why we ask you, why do you put the label on the crisps? And we have strong doubts that the crisps are really relevant. A relevant contribution for consumers not knowing what to do, eat only the salted chips, which have 110 gram, or eating salt and vinegar with 120 gram, or no chips, or I don't know. And that's our point. Do only the label on, not on food. We think food is a sector where the labeling doesn't work with carbon because there are too many products on the market, and this is too much information for the consumer to know all the different ranges, which products are good or bad. And you have said the use phase is very often more relevant than the production phase. Yes, we had the same results. For example, with coffee, making coffee is much more relevant than the production of coffee. So, in our point of view, it makes no sense to put a label on the coffee. There are other fields where a labeling is more appropriate to guide consumers. But if there are too many labels on the market, you will lose the interest of consumers and you confuse them. That's the point we say no to the label in the food sector.
Murray.
I think the point about comparisons is a really interesting one. I guess there's lots of examples out there where similar things happen to carbon labeling. If we take fair trade, you can't compare fair trade products. Either they are fair trade and they've got the label, or they're not and they don't. Same with organic or bio. Either they're organic and they've got a label, or they're not and they don't. In this case, either they're reducing their carbon footprint and they get the label, or they're not and they don't. And I think that comparison for me is telling. It says other successful schemes out there like fair trade, like organic bio, have been shown to certainly interest a segment of consumers, and I see no reason why carbon labeling can't do the same. I think because there's such diversity in the different carbon labeling systems around the world, I know what's true of the carbon reduction label with its reduction efforts is not always true of all of the other carbon labels that are out there. But I do think that helping people get started is actually the most important thing today. And expecting people to make complicated comparisons is something for the future, if at all. Actually, helping people understand which brands are reducing their footprint and which brands aren't is the most important thing. And that's where we should really be focusing. That's what the carbon reduction label's designed to do. I'll actually just stop there.
I have again a problem with the reduction label because when you reduce something, you always the latest will have the most potential for reduction, and the companies who have done the most, they can reduce only a little bit anymore. So also on this side, it's not a good approach. Only to say if you reduce something, it's good. We say no, it's not good. You have to be aware how relevant the reduction is. Is it really a contribution, yes or no? And if it's no contribution or only a small contribution, I think it's not worth to be an additional label with all the uncertainties in it.
So Gabriela says the reductions, or the reduction claim in that sense, doesn't compare to claims that other labels would make that give more and clearer advice, like she mentioned, for example, the Blue Angel or other schemes that work in a different manner, and you cannot compare reduction claims to that kind of labeling.
I don't think we would make that comparison, actually, but I think the point there, well, I guess the point about reductions is actually true, that for the forward-thinking companies who've made lots of efforts already, it is harder. And over time it will be harder for everyone to make reductions. But that's a fact of where we are, that we have globally an 80% target, at least in the West, an 80% reduction target, and getting the first 1 or 2% is going to be quite easy. It's basic energy efficiency. Getting 79 or 80 is going to be really very, very hard. And yet we have to go in that direction. And if we only do something because it's simple for us to achieve, then that doesn't really take us very far. So I think it's important that we do allow companies many of whom have already made huge reductions internally. I talked about the Walkers example. We encourage them to do more and to work with their suppliers to do the things that are difficult, that require capital investment maybe, that require collaboration in ways that they've not collaborated before. But that's absolutely right that they do so. And I think there's a philosophical point here as well, that for me, reduction is the most important thing. Because, of course, when it comes to climate, there's no such thing as good, and really there's no such thing as bad either, or at least we don't have a way to define those. And the best way I can describe it almost is to say that climate change is like obesity. Climate change is not like smoking. So with the smoking problem, it's a big problem, but we know what to do. We know what bad behavior is, it's smoking. We know what good behavior is, healthy behavior, it's not smoking. And encouraging people to make that switch from bad behavior to good behavior is a simple thing to do. It's difficult for many people, but understanding the switch is simple. Climate change isn't like that. Climate change is like obesity. And with obesity, that's caused by too much fat, too much salt, too much sugar. But everybody needs a bit of fat, a bit of salt, and a bit of sugar. The question is, how much is okay? And all of a sudden, there's no black and white. We're dealing in shades of grey. And therefore, it's going to be a much harder problem to solve, to encourage people to make reductions, but only to a sensible level. And climate change is exactly the same. The carbon footprint of every product is exactly the same. Every product has a carbon footprint. It's not black, it's not bad, but it's somehow in that spectrum. And we can't reasonably expect a product to end up with a zero carbon footprint. It just doesn't, today at least, seem possible. The best thing we can do is to get them to move from being not so good to being better, to make improvements like that obesity comparison. And that, for me, is really what the carbon footprinting movement is about, and ultimately what carbon labelling needs to be designed to help us achieve. And if it does that, then it's made a valuable contribution.
Okay, we just heard carbon labelling offers a scale on which to drive reduction claims or make reduction claims and reduction efforts towards consumers. And before Gabriela Fleischer answers, I would like to also invite you to get into this specific point in consumer advice and communication. And please there. Can we have a microphone for Sylvain Chevassus, please?
Sylvain Chevassus from France. I'm never disappointed when ANEC is in the panel.
True, I remember.
It's good. It's good to have refreshing and critical views to allow a good discussion. In June, we organized the national conference on environmental labeling, and we had your president, and basically he told us that labeling was total rubbish.
Please try to make your point.
Well, precisely. I'm coming to my point. I read your study, and I find it more constructive than your presentation, because if you read the study, it's critical, and it's constructively critical. It's really interesting. but it does say that under certain conditions, for example, going more multi-criteria, having strong tools such as PCRs and so on, presenting the information on a relative scale and all that, there is a potential for carbon and environmental labeling of consumer products. So I would really invite people here in the room who have not read the study yet to do it. It's interesting. And you said that the carbon trust label on the crisps packages is misleading or is not correct, but for example, for Casino, on your presentation, it's not really correct either, because you only take the example of the absolute figure information at the front of the package, but behind the package, you find this absolute figure information put on a relative scale where you can see, from relative information in terms of environmental impact, and there's also information on waste and recycling, which makes it not just carbon, but with another criterion as well.
Okay, thank you, Sylvain. I would like to actually split that up into two arguments that I heard, one to Gabriela Fleischer and one to Euan Murray. Gabriela Fleischer, carbon labels usually, and Euan Murray also said that, are not usually without other means and measures, information provided alongside them. We heard that also. So it's not usually a carbon label alone. How do you see that?
I'm not sure if I get the point. We say, when you said we are not completely...
Does it make sense to, well, is it still, is it a bad idea to carbon label?
Not in general. It's like it's written in the study, under certain condition, it makes sense to put a label or a rating scale with the carbon emission on a product. For example, with cars, we are quite in favor of the labeling which exists. We have some points which are not that good, but with cars, where the use phase is most relevant, it makes sense. But I'm contra of the carbon labeling in the food sector, because there it makes no sense. And the examples I showed are only in the food sector and the light bulbs. And there we say it doesn't make sense. In the study, we differentiate different product groups. And we try to find out which one is the best information to address climate change and to give consumer a chance to make the right choice. And you said also the Casino label on the back has a rating scale. Franz Fiala did a presentation last week, and he showed a slide with this rating scale, and the criticism about the rating scale is that everything is green. It's from light green to dark green. And again, do I have to choose the light green or the dark green, and why is it green? And it's again about the guidance and how relevant the CO2 emission impact of the product is in reality. Do I do really a contribution as a consumer if I buy this product? And we have strong doubts that it is. There are more relevant product groups where I can do something, but not by choosing, I don't know, pizza or this one or that one. And in the case I have to compare, and if I cannot compare, I do not know what to do. It's only an information, it's a number, but nothing more.
Carbon labeling is not for food products, and
I think that's a really interesting point. I think the point about numbers, again, we should probably leave, but the point about food, I think, is a really important one. I'm not sure about the statistics for the EU or the world as a whole, but certainly if you look at the UK, somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of the carbon footprint of the UK is in our food system. So if we ignore that, we're not going to get to 80%, even if every other sector of the economy went to zero. So it's clear that decarbonising our food system is an incredibly important part of meeting our long-term Kyoto and carbon reduction targets. Of course, the footprint sits in lots of different stages of that system, on farm, in factories, in how we use products. And I believe, as I believe for all products, that by tying that together through product footprinting or LCA or whatever you want to call it, we understand where the big emission sources are, where the reduction opportunities are, and then we can go and do something about it. And what we've seen in so many of the studies we've done is that actually the consumer has a really important part to play, and getting that information into their hands to understand how to reduce the footprint of the things they buy and of how they use them is actually one of the most important things we can do to start tackling that really big chunk of our overall carbon footprint. Now, I accept that it's a complicated process. The communications process is complicated too, and almost certainly we haven't got it exactly right. I think you just need to look at the range of different schemes that are out there and the number of different ways that people try to communicate this information to understand that we're probably not yet settled on the best way to communicate. But certainly I do believe that communicating is a valuable thing to do and will help people lead lower carbon lives in the long run, and that must be what we aim towards.
I have a couple of arguments among the participants, but I would like to hear from you. Consumers are important to drive emission reductions in the food sector.
Yes, we know that 20% of the CO2 emission is in the food sector. We do agree, but it's very often the use phase. It's not the production, and that's why we say you do not help consumers giving a number on crisp. For the use phase is out of your scope, so you do not help. Yeah, it makes no sense with the crisps to have a use phase. There is no CO2 emission, I think. But for shampoo, for example, it is not the production of the shampoo which is the main point. It is the use of hot water when you wash your hair. So you have to advise the consumer, reduce the warmth of the water or something like this. But that's why I say giving the information only about the production makes no sense. We are really aware that the food sector is relevant, but we would like to have general recommendations for the consumer and to concentrate with labels on products, only on the products which are relevant in the production phase, or where you can give advice for the use phase. But all the other things makes no sense for me.
Annemarie.
Yeah. Annemarie Kerkel from Pre-Consultants. I have two questions, one for Gabriela.
Please, no questions. Make your argument, please.
Oh.
Supporting what is said. We don't have a discussion at the moment.
Okay. I think when there's a good... when the carbon label is set up in such a way that you can compare products like an A to F ranking, but then among all products, then you can guide consumers to make a good decision. So I was wondering, when there's a good guiding label, if you support such a carbon label. And the other thing is, I really would like to know if there's also evidence that consumers make different choices when there's a carbon label on the product. So, for example, with the chips, did PepsiCo make an evaluation if consumers make different choices? So, when it has an effect, that supports also the use of carbon labels.
Okay, I take that as a statement. The first one, carbon labels may work if they are supplemented by good advice. The first one, and then we go on.
If it's a product group which is relevant, yes, we will support this. But the existing labels are not the one we do support. Yes, we have to start, but start with consumer information, which has so many limitations. I think it's not a good point, because you will lose the interest of the consumer. And it's more appropriate to integrate the carbon indicator into existing labels, from our point of view. you have the organic labels. So you can start with integrating something into organic. And I do understand that walkers want to talk about their improvements they have done. But perhaps it's much better to do it in a business report, to do other things than to put a label with a number on crisp. Again.
There's a question about sales, and this is obviously a hot topic, especially for the business audiences. I think the evidence we've seen is good but not conclusive. We've seen two studies, one done by Walkers about 3 years ago now when they first launched the carbon reduction label, the second by Tesco where they looked at orange juice. And in both cases, in the Walkers case, in introducing the label, Walkers saw an increase in sales, but at the same time they were doing some other advertising, and actually it's very difficult to unpick what really was the driving effect. And we saw something similar with Tesco, where when they introduced the labels on orange juice, they labelled a range of different Tesco orange juices, some which have a higher carbon footprint than others, and the label says that. It's not about numbers specifically, but it says one has a higher carbon footprint than the other and encourages people to switch. And in that time, when they first introduced it, they did see sales of the higher carbon footprint slow down and of the lower carbon footprint increase. But at the same time, there was a heat wave in the UK, there were some price promotions. Again, it's quite difficult to say honestly that it was definitely because of labelling. So I think the evidence is positive, but it's not conclusive. I think what is clear is that people recognise that it's something valuable that a company and a brand has done, and that builds trust, it builds engagement, and there are plenty of studies that show that. I can talk about that at length, but I probably won't in the interest of time.
Okay, we have several people. One in the blue shirt.
Kilian Hochran from Gore. You said several times the brand should be communicating. Why isn't that more in your focus? I see strong value in that concept in such that you're getting a whole brand or a whole company even behind this versus companies or brands picking some product lines which get a carbon label and then are used to, I would say, almost greenwash the brands. I think that's the risk. And how would you curb that if you're doing product-focused labeling versus really getting the whole company to get behind it and then build trust for the brand and the company to be responsible, not just on carbon, but overall. I think the multi-criteria approach here applies depending on the product category you're in.
That's a really great statement. It's a really important point. And I think the move to looking at products and looking at brands actually has closed off a really big risk that I saw. So if we go back maybe 4 or 5 years, when climate change was on the front page of the paper almost every day, companies were coming out saying they'd measured their carbon footprint and they were making reductions, or they'd achieved some reductions. And a lot of that communication I thought was really quite misleading. So I don't want to single out any companies in particular, because I think that would be unfair. But we saw many organizations in particular in the food industry where the business itself is a head office, and growing is outsourced to farmers, manufacturing is outsourced to a different supplier, distribution is outsourced, and of course then the consumer use phase is obviously not included. And so the company was really just a head office, and they were carbon footprinting the head office, maybe buying green electricity, and going out saying, we're great. And by extension, our products have a low carbon footprint. So when they when that's reported in the paper, it's a picture of the product, it's a picture of the brand that gets reported. No one says it's only a head office of 20 people. And the consumer looks at that and says, oh, okay, this stuff I buy in the supermarket must be good, when in actual fact, no one knows because no one's looked at it. So taking the life cycle view, the supply chain view, the product view, is the best way to make sure that what we then buy is really well understood and reduction efforts are being made wherever it's most efficient to do it, in the supply chain or in my house. And that really is an important focus when it comes to that communication. I think picking off individual products is an interesting one. I guess with walkers, we footprinted walkers. It's everything that they sell. The same with Tropicana, Quaker. I guess it's different when you talk to supermarkets. And you know, I work with Tesco, where we're footprinting still a growing number of products. It will be 500 by the end of the year. But that's only part of course, the huge number of products they sell. There's a lot of work to do, certainly.
Okay, and in this debate we have a very limited time frame, unfortunately. I see a lot of arguments in the room. What I would now like to do, I still have a couple of people, and I would like to give the ones that we have the opportunity to make a short statement on the question, on the issues, and then both of you a closing statement where you take up the last points also made and what you have heard before. Anna?
Thanks. Anna Rickert from Sweden, working with climate certification on food products. And I would say that you're both, to some extent, wrong. And we think that the way it's working out with our system that we developed for a couple of years now is that we don't think that the figure on the product is the right way to go for food products. Yeah? But we do think that it's some kind of label communication is an important driver to enable the communication between producer and consumer, and to facilitate and stimulate the improvements in the production phase. Now, we only, in our label, we only include up until the shop gate, so we don't include the use phase. We think that's other tools come in for consumer communication. But we think that a labeling system should label only what they can really influence in the production. So the way it works out in Sweden is quite interesting, actually, because there are quite a number of systems for carbon declarations that have been working as a business-to-business communication. And for business to consumer, we think it should be simplified, and we're looking at the type of improvements that we can achieve would be ranging from 5% for meat products to 80% for greenhouse products, and that's quite substantial. And I think that type of system could make a good contribution to reducing climate impact.
We have Guido Axmann and Sonja.
Guido Axmann, first of all, thanks a lot. I definitely found this very helpful, and I will rethink some of my conclusions I had so far. And I would like, after this debate, encourage us all, as we found out that I think consumption plays a big role in driving down the emissions. Let's get constructive again after this debate and find the ways out if we haven't clearly seen what really... We don't have the perfect solution yet, so let's find it after this debate. That's my statement.
Okay. Sonja, please.
Sonja Bonsay, CDP. I think I'm going to be a little controversial and be the first person to actually say, I like figures. I think they're useful. If you look at the bag of crisps at the front, there will be some nutritional information for those people trying to budget how many calories they eat a day. Now, clearly, I'm not particularly good at that, but I find it useful to have this information on my products. If I was going to set myself, and consumers are starting to set themselves targets for reducing their own emissions, they offset their flights, they try to drive together to work, they're starting to make those changes. And if they want to create personal budgets to try and reduce their emissions on a daily basis or on a yearly basis, then things like these total emissions labels could be really useful for having 1 pint of milk is 1% of your recommended daily allowance of carbon. I'll leave it there, but I'm pro figures.
Katharina Wöhl from DIN and ISO.
Yeah, Katharina Wöhl from DIN, the German Institute of Standardization, but now I just want to speak as a consumer.
Okay.
As a consumer who cares. And I try to buy fair trade products, and I try to buy products with a label with bio. And why do I do it? Because I want to make the world a little bit better because of my choice. The problem is with CO2 labels, when I buy a product with a CO2 label, I don't know something about the limitations, and I can't be sure if, therefore, because the organization tried to do everything to reduce their carbon, maybe they have a higher water footprint, which is also quite important these days. Or I don't know if people used more pesticides. So at the end, me as a consumer, I don't want to have to decide if I buy a bio product or a product with a lower carbon footprint. What was also the example of this energy efficiency label and the carbon trust label. Thanks.
Okay, Heinz Schmid from Klimatop.
I would like to make a statement, if I'm allowed to. We see an effect of the label now. We only can label products that are not in the usual supply chain because we label the best. So somebody has changed the product to reduce the carbon footprint by at least normally 20% in our case. So we do not label the normal products, we label the best. And now what we see is that competitors from labeled products come to us and say, we can do that too. But it's not a simple change in the product. We are not down to a few percentages of change. They really have to change something very substantially in the supply chain. And we start to see an effect now of the label. But it won't come with customers in the first place. It will be on the side of B2B. And we think there is a driver in it, but you have to break the supply chain, the usual supply chain. You have to go to a new product where you have a technological advanced stage in it.
Okay, one last statement from the plenary. Stephanie Giesebock-Down from 3M.
Yep, that would be me.
Yes.
First of all, I think, making a claim that a product is part of whatever program to reduce carbon footprint makes perfect sense to me. And that, for me, is similar to the EPA's Climate Leaders program, where you're saying, okay, the company is assigning to that program. However, that's very different for me from putting a number on a product. I think those are two very, very different things. In addition to that, that number, I think, really gives a wrong sense of certainty, because we have heard yesterday all the challenges with that actual number. And though I do love numbers, they have to mean something. And I have to make sure I can understand the number. And I have to make sure I can compare the number. So the number actually, I think, also confuses, as we have heard before, and does not help guide the consumer. For me, making a claim based on a carbon footprint evaluation to help guide the consumer, such as the 30-degree change, makes perfect sense. But for me, that's an environmental marketing claim, not a carbon footprint label. So I think that may be just a discrepancy in term there, but I think that's important too.
Okay, now I would like to ask both of you for your closing statements, taking into account some of the arguments that we still have in the room. And you start, Euan Murray, so you have to start now so that Gabriela Fleischer then has the closing statement from her side.
Okay. Thanks, Rasmus. I think this has been a really useful, really interesting discussion. I think the thing that I'm taking from it is actually that there doesn't seem to be very much debate about whether doing this work is important or not. It's clear that we need to understand the footprint of the things that we buy and use to drive changes in business and for each of us to cut our own carbon footprints. It also seems pretty clear that communication down the supply chain and between businesses and brands and consumers has an incredibly important role to play in helping people make the right sorts of choices. What we seem to be talking about is what are the best things to communicate on a carbon label? What is it that's really going to drive changes in behaviour, both in businesses and then with each of us? And the point about numbers is an important one, but actually for a lot of what we need to do is a distraction. We know, we've seen through some of the examples that getting people to compare numbers is not what we're actually trying to do. Getting people to make simple switches in the products they buy and then how they use them is really the most important thing. And a successful carbon label for me is one that does that. It gives people simple advice that doesn't cost any more, that doesn't take any more time, that will help them buy lower carbon products and then use them in a lower carbon way. And that really is the challenge that almost we're throwing open to everyone in the room, is how can we best create those communications, create those labeling systems that do just that help people make the right sorts of simple choices. And for me, when we do that, then we'll have a carbon labeling system that works.
Thank you very much, Euan Murray. Gabriela Fleischer, your closing.
Yes, I want to start with an impression from yesterday. I think we learned a lot about the limitations of the methodologies yesterday. And first of all, I want to find solutions for all these limitations, because before we do not have a methodology which does work, we cannot start with a label, I think, in my opinion. So I think we have to make sure that we have to take the right environmental impact of a product into account. Not to shift the burden from carbon to water print or to, I don't know, to air pollution, only if we are making sure that the environmental impact of carbon is the one we have to focus on, because it's a major one. We have to go this way. Consumer information has to be clear, comparable, and credible. If it's not so, and I think on the basis of the present methodology, it's not credible. We have seen yesterday, and we have heard from the road testing, that you can get different information from the supply chain, and you can't trust the information. We need more work to find solutions for the methodology. So, if you do want to give consumer information, you have to make sure that it's clear, comparable, and credible. Last but not least, I think we need more research how to address climate change, carbon footprint in the right way for consumers. And you can do education, you can do consumer information, but it needs more attention how to do so. I think we shouldn't go on with labeling if we haven't done the rest of our homework, because we will lose the interest of the consumer in this issue when it comes out that they cannot trust the labels which are on the market. Thank you.
Well,